Ethan Reynolds, a well-known technology investor, was used to control in business, in travel, and in life. He flew private, stayed in exclusive hotels, and made decisions that moved markets. But that day, his private jet was grounded for maintenance, forcing him to board a commercial plane for the first time in years. It was meant to be an uneventful 8-hour flight. Just him, his wife Clara, their newborn daughter Sophie, and a few members of his staff. But within an hour of takeoff, the calm turned into chaos. The baby began to cry, loud, sharp, and unrelenting. At first it seemed normal, the kind of restlessness any infant might show on a flight. Ethan's wife tried to rock Sophie gently. She whispered soothing words. She offered her a bottle, sang softly, even walked up and down the aisle. But nothing helped. The crying grew louder. Passengers turned their heads. Some frowned. Others exchanged irritated glances. The sound echoed through the cabin. Ethan tried to keep his composure. He asked a flight attendant for warm milk, a blanket, anything that might help. He even offered extra money to anyone who could find a way to calm his daughter down. But despite all his resources and influence, he couldn't fix the one problem that mattered in that moment. The tension in the air was heavy. People sighed. A man 2 rows behind muttered, "Can't they do something about that baby?" Ethan's wife looked down, embarrassed, on the verge of tears. And then, from the very back of the plane, someone stood up. It was an elderly black woman, dressed simply in a faded cardigan and long skirt. Her hands were wrinkled, her movements slow but steady. She carried a small cloth bag and a calmness that contrasted with the frustration filling the cabin. As she began walking down the aisle, flight attendants hesitated, but the woman smiled and kept moving forward, her presence quiet but certain. When she reached Ethan's row, she stopped. She looked at the crying baby, then at the exhausted mother and said gently, "May I hold her?" Ethan blinked, surprised. His wife hesitated. They didn't know this woman, but something in her expression, a kind of knowing tenderness, made them pause. Without a word, Clara handed over her baby. The elderly woman took Sophie in her arms with care, resting the child against her chest. Then she began to hum. The sound was soft and steady, a tune that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her, part lullaby, part prayer. Almost immediately, Sophie's cries began to fade. The wails softened to whimpers. Then, silence. Within minutes, the baby was asleep. The entire cabin went quiet. Passengers stared in disbelief. The flight attendants exchanged looks of amazement. Even Ethan, a man who had seen billion-dollar deals unfold, sat speechless. The woman smiled down at the baby and kept humming, her hand gently patting the child's back. She didn't seem hurried, proud, or surprised. She simply radiated peace. After a few moments, Ethan leaned forward and asked, "How did you do that?" The woman looked up, her eyes warm. "I'm Hattie Williams," she said softly. "I raised 6 children of my own, lost 2, and helped bring many more into this world back home in Alabama. Sometimes, little ones just need to feel a heartbeat that isn't afraid." Ethan didn't know what to say. For years, his life had been about numbers, power, and control. But in that moment, watching a stranger calm his child with nothing more than love and patience, he felt something shift. For the rest of the flight, Mrs. Williams held Sophie in her arms. She didn't complain, didn't ask for anything, and didn't move much. The baby slept peacefully, her tiny hand gripping the woman's sleeve. Flight attendants brought Mrs. Williams tea. Passengers who had been annoyed minutes earlier now smiled when they passed by. A few whispered thanks as they walked past her seat. When the plane finally landed, Ethan and Clara were overcome with gratitude. Ethan reached for his wallet and pulled out a large sum of cash. He offered it to Mrs. Williams, saying, "Please take this. You have no idea what this means to us." The elderly woman shook her head gently. "No, son," she said. "You keep that. You don't owe me a thing," he insisted. but she smiled and placed her hand on his arm. "Money can't calm a crying heart. Only kindness can." She handed Sophie back to her parents, picked up her cloth bag, and slowly walked toward the exit. By the time Ethan gathered his things, she was gone. He asked a flight attendant if they knew who she was or if she had left any contact information. No one had seen where she went. It was as if she'd disappeared as quietly as she'd arrived. In the days that followed, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her words. A heartbeat that isn't afraid. He replayed the scene in his mind. The cabin's silence, the woman's calm, his daughter's peaceful breathing. It felt like something he couldn't explain with logic or science. Months later, in an interview, Ethan said that experience changed his outlook on life completely. He admitted that for years, he had measured success in terms of power and possessions. But on that flight, he witnessed a kind of wealth that couldn't be bought, the wealth of wisdom, experience, and compassion. He realized that the world often overlooks people like Mrs. Williams, elders, caregivers, the ones who quietly hold everything together while expecting nothing in return. In her honor, he founded a charitable organization called the Hattie Foundation. Its mission was to support elderly caregivers and community volunteers who dedicate their lives to caring for others without recognition or pay. The foundation funded training programs, provided financial aid, and celebrated the quiet heroes often forgotten by society. When news of the foundation spread, people began asking where the inspiration came from. Ethan never gave interviews about it, but his staff said he kept a small note on his desk that read, "Money can't calm a crying heart." The story of that flight eventually surfaced online, shared by a flight attendant who had witnessed it firsthand. Her post described a moment when an entire cabin, filled with strangers from different backgrounds, watched empathy conquer frustration. The story went viral, not because of who Ethan was, but because of what Mrs. Williams did. She didn't perform a miracle. She didn't demand attention. She simply saw pain and responded with love. Her act reminded people everywhere that compassion is the one language every human understands. In a world that often values noise over wisdom and wealth over humanity, her quiet gesture stood out as something rare, a reminder that care, patience, and empathy are the true measures of strength. Ethan never saw Mrs. Williams again, but her influence remained. He said later that her lesson reshaped how he viewed people, no longer through the lens of class, success, or education, but through their ability to bring peace where others bring pressure. And sometimes that's all the world needs, one calm heart in a room full of noise. So the next time you see someone struggling, a parent trying to soothe a child, a stranger facing a hard day, or someone who simply looks lost, remember the woman on that plane. Because what she showed wasn't just kindness, it was understanding, the kind that cuts through judgment, frustration, and pride. And that is what humanity looks like. On that flight, it wasn't technology, status, or wealth that made a difference. It was a simple heartbeat, steady, fearless, and full of love.